Howdy, and welcome to the second episode of Ask a Trump Supporter. This week, you'll be discussing race and abortion. This week's host is Dion Okeke, the president of Students for Trump at Texas A&M, and he'll be joined by students Asher and Brendan. Hope you enjoy.
Trump 2020. You guys are filming this, and you're never going to hear anything if I...
Right, I know. Well, I'm going to be passing the mic kind of back and forth here.
Yeah.
So, Asher, right?
Yes.
Asher, that's a great name.
Thank you.
Absolutely awesome. I've never actually heard that name, so that's very nice. Thank you for sitting down.
Yeah.
So this is Ask a Trump Supporter, is our second episode.
Okay.
And today's discussion's about race, all right? And if you want to ask me something else that, is not necessarily specifically about race, we can sort of divulge into that in certain circumstances. But I hope to keep the sort of conversation about race today.
Yeah,
is that okay?
For sure. Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
awesome. And so tell me a little bit about yourself before we get started so the reviewers kind of know who you are. Are you a student here at Texas A&M?
Yeah, so I'm a student, a senior marketing student here, and so I'm from San Antonio, Texas. I come from a military family, and follower of Christ. That's kind of where my identity sits.
Okay.
I'm a Christian, a devout follower of Christ. I want to become a pastor, and so that's kind of about me personally. I wouldn't say I sit too far on either side of a party. I've always voted Republican, though, and I did vote for Trump in this election. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about myself.
Awesome. So you said you came from a military family,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
Okay, so your parents or...
Yeah, so both of my parents served in the Air Force, and so my mom only served for 3 years, but my dad is retired Air Force, and he retired in 2008, but still works for the Air Force. So since 1985, he's an intelligence operative, and so does all kinds of top secret stuff. I don't really.
Well, we thank your parents for your service. That's absolutely amazing. So, like I said, it's Ask a Trump Supporter, so you're able to ask me anything about today's topic, which is race, right?
Yeah. So I guess my question, and something I wrestle with, is obviously we see that the United States is divided right now. Right, on the basis of race. And so I guess the question would be, how do you think that Trump has handled race relations? Do you think he's been proactive enough? And do you think that, honestly, do you think his supporter base, and I could be totally wrong here, is assumedly primarily, white Americans, and I could be wrong on that, of course. Do you think that he is handling it well as a leader of his supporters and of our country? Do you think he's handling the racial situation well?
Yeah, so there's a couple things there that I kind of want to talk about. It's a very good question, by the way, and I think it's a question that should be asked, and it's a very important question that should be asked regarding any presidency, whether it be Barack Obama, President Trump, whoever it may be. As far as him handling the race relations well, absolutely. I think that when you compare his legacy when it comes to race relations to any other president, dating all the way back to Abraham Lincoln, I think that he has a very great reputation when it comes to race relations in the country. And I think that comes... I think that you can really see that, especially with the outcome in terms of black unemployment.
Of course, yeah.
When it comes to the poverty rate within the minority communities. We've seen the lowest minority poverty rate since the 1950s, I believe, 1960s, in 53 years. So it's quite an accomplishment, I think. But I want to kind of ask you a question here. You said race relations.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about specifically what you mean by that, and then I can kind of answer based off that.
Yeah, so I guess the idea would be, I support the policies that he's put in place. As far as you mentioned, black unemployment being at an all-time low, and so I don't question his policies as much as I guess the overwhelming voice that I hear, from people around campus, people my age, is that Trump is a racist, right? And so, granted, his policies don't seem to reflect that, but I guess the question would be, do you think that he is handling himself personally well in regards to race.
So are you specifically talking about? I just want to get to the cake here. Let's start beating around the bush, kind of. And so, are you specifically talking about maybe his rhetoric, or I know you're talking. You mentioned that his policy might. You said granted, his policy seems to reflect great things when it comes to race relations, right? But maybe his rhetoric is that what you're kind of getting at?
His rhetoric, and I mean, I guess if you look at the supporter base, I mean, there is this reputation of the supporter base being racist. Not that that's true by any means. But I mean, obviously, we have groups out here like Latinos for Trump that that's an eye-catching name because people think that those two things are mutually exclusive, right? And so why do you think that people think those things are mutually exclusive? And do you think that's Trump's fault, or do you think that's the people's fault for confirming their own bias about him by taking clips of what he said out of context?
Right.
What do you think there?
No, you're spot on there. I think a lot of it has to do with the media. And sort of the media representation of Donald Trump. We hear this all the time, fake news. He says that all the time at his rallies and whatnot. But I think a lot of it has to do with the way the media has shined the light on him in a negative perspective. Okay. We saw this all the way up from 2016, right when he was coming down the escalators, right? Yeah. Donald Trump's a racist. Donald Trump's a racist. He's running as a Republican. Meanwhile, before he was president of the United States, he got none of that, right? He was honestly sort of put on a pedestal by members in the black community and members in minority communities. So I think that the media has definitely played a role when it comes to portraying Trump as a racist, for sure. Whether it be taking things out of context, like you said, when it comes to maybe some of his comments here and there. Absolutely.
And so let me ask, do you think, obviously Trump is not infallible, do you think that there's anything he could do to improve his stance or his rhetoric on race relations?
Absolutely. So I every time I sit down with somebody and talk about Donald Trump, I'm always very, I wouldn't say critical, but I'm objective, right? And I want to be objective as objective as possible, right? When it comes to his presidency, I'm not going to blindly support anybody, right? So, like you said, he has his flaws, right? And I believe also that he has flaws as president, and as a person, and human character flaws as well. I do think that he can say things better, right? I do think that he can phrase things better, absolutely. But what matters to me most is his policy, right? And what's going to affect me is his policy, right? So that's the way I see it as a Trump supporter, and I guess as a black American, right?
So, just out of my own curiosity, what has it been like for you as a black Trump supporter? Has that caused any issues personally or in your family? Because like I said, often thought of as two mutually exclusive things. What has that experience been like for you?
Oh yeah, man, it's interesting. That's the best way I think I can put it. It's a very interesting position to be in. Barack Obama received only, I think, 11% of the black vote in 2008, 2012 as well. Very small percentage of black people actually support Republican candidates for a long time. If we go back to even further, Abraham Lincoln days, obviously black Americans were much more supportive of the Republican Party. However, things did sort of switch around. Not to say that the party switched, by the way, but that's a whole different discussion. But I want to kind of answer your question a little bit more. So as a black Trump supporter living in 2020, it's been interesting. I've been called more racist things, believe it or not, by other black people, right? I was out here not too long ago, right behind us here, at a Sully protest. And for the people that are watching, Sullivan Ross is a statue that we have here at Texas A&M University, who's a former Confederate general. And I was in support of Sullivan Ross staying here on campus for reasons in which we can get into later in the conversation or on a different day. But it's a whole different conversation on its own. But, when I was out here in support of Sullivan Ross staying on campus for what he did for the school, I was out here because, or when I was out here, I was called a coon by one of the anti-protest, one of the people that wanted to take the statue down, right? So I never been called the N-word. I never been called a racial slur by a white person for 20 years of my life. But as soon as I stand up for something for a person that isn't supposed to do that technically, because in their eyes I'm not supposed to be supporting a Republican candidate, I'm not supposed to be supporting Sullivan Ross, then I'm called a racial slur. So it's definitely been eye-opening for sure. As a black American that does support conservative ideas and President Trump for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting because when I see someone, that wears a hat that says Latinos for Trump or is a black American who's supporting Trump, my assumption is that they've thought through things.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's not an easy decision to come into, because, for me growing up, the easy decision to slip right into would, be a Republican Party, Republican candidate, supporting these ideals. So
right.
It's really interesting. I wouldn't expect that you would get such flack for supporting this candidate. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely like you said, it is interesting. Like I said, it's interesting, but it's also kind of sad. I think that we're not able to think freely in society, right?
Yeah, and it seems as though the overwhelming trend right now is we can't have civil discourse, and we live in just such a polarizing time where if you support Trump, you must hate black people. If you support Biden, you must be an idiot. We're so polarized over political candidates, and I think that the key is civil discourse. Like this, whether between people who don't seem to have too much difference, in their ideas, or between two people who are polar opposites, politically.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I think that things are very polarized right now.
Yeah.
I think that everybody can agree on that, whether you're on the left or the right. And me holding a political framework or political ideology that doesn't happen to, go with the norm, the social norm, as we might say, shouldn't be held against me. And you have people like Joe Biden coming out and saying that if you have an issue or you're not sure whether to vote for me or for Donald Trump, then you're not black. So that's also very telling of Joe Biden and sort of where he stands as well, right?
Yeah, I think it's dangerous, to say the least. Just dangerous to put words in people's mouth, or to just discount someone's identity, racially, based on whichever candidate they're supporting.
Yeah, absolutely. So, are there any other questions that you might want to ask me? I mean, I'm all ears. Or
I don't think so. Yeah, no? I think that's about it. Yeah.
Okay. You had a buddy here, didn't you?
Yeah, I don't think he wants to sit down.
No, he doesn't want to sit down? Okay. Is there anything else that you want to ask me about? I mean, it doesn't have to be about race. We can go into something else if you want.
No, I think that's it.
Okay, man. Asher, right?
Yeah.
Asher, man, it was a pleasure.
Hey.
Pleasure talking to you, man.
Appreciate you, man.
Yes, sir. All right.
Turning Point USA. Shout out.
We didn't have anybody to sit down that disagreed. So we got Brendan in here just to kind of have a discussion. Brendan, what do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about our discussion today about race, or do you want to talk about something else?
Let's talk about something that really matters. That affects millions of people. Abortion. It affects millions of people because they're dead.
That's right.
So, you have one side who stands for death. You have another side that stands for life, in the sense of like the unborn child. It's if you believe that life begins at conception, you vote for the side of Biden. What you're doing is you're giving in and saying, I'm okay that hundreds of thousands of unborn children die every year. That's what you're saying. You're saying, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with this genocide happening. I'm saying if you accept that. If you don't like Trump, think he's rude or whatever, I'll vote for someone else. But you still think life begins at conception, but you still vote for Biden, you're okay with that. So I think that's the biggest issue in the election. As a Catholic, the U.S. Council of Bishops Conference of Bishops calls it the preeminent issue. And because it's the preeminent issue, that's the dominant way in forming my conscience on how to vote, as should other people.
Right, we have this conversation a lot, especially with Christians and the ways in which they vote, right? If you're a Christian and you vote for a policy that doesn't line up with your faith, does that make you a Christian? That's the conversation we have a lot, right? And voting within the means of your faith, and your faith coming first, right? So you're a big advocate for this. I know that. Give the viewers a little touch of that and a little reasoning behind that idea.
Well, you mentioned something though. It was like, what if someone votes for a pro-choice candidate? Are they a Christian? Well, the answer is yes. They're just not being a very good Christian, and we're supposed to say that. As Christians, we're supposed to make righteous judgment when it comes to our fellow Christians who are, doing something wrong. It's good to call out people who are doing something like that. And then, regards to the other thing, it was about how we should. What would you say the question was?
Well, I was just asking you if you could maybe give us a little hint, right? Give us a little reasoning as behind that idea. No, you're good.
So if you're a Christian and you believe that, Jesus is Lord, and He gave us, the Trinity, God gave the Jewish people the Ten Commandments. We follow the Ten Commandments. We follow what Jesus taught us, right? So God's law always trumps any laws on earth and trumps any law at all. You always put God's law first. So if God's law says that you shall not kill, you shall not steal, right? You shall not riot, basically, right? You're not going to go and riot and steal things. You're not going to kill the unborn, right? So these things, those always come first. So when you vote as a Christian, what you're supposed to do, you're supposed to form your conscience, you're supposed to have a Christian conscience on how you vote. And with Biden, it's really difficult to do that because, again, he's not for order, right? Because if he wants to defund the police. He's on the side of defunding the police. Yeah. He's on the side of secularism. He's pro-abortion. He claims to be Catholic, and here's the thing: if you're a Catholic, you cannot break away from your faith when you're voting. It's called a heresy called Americanism. Your faith must influence the way you vote. You can't be like, I'm a Christian, but I don't think the government has a role in this. I think they should allow that. That's not how that works. And it's really sad to see Catholics, especially like Biden is representing Catholics, and then he does this, and that's not the way Catholics think. Or are supposed to think at all. Some do, unfortunately, but it's not the way you're supposed to think. And this idea of separation of church and state that we know it today in America is wrong. It's simply wrong. If you actually read the First Amendment, most people don't realize this, separation of church and state is not stated in the First Amendment. It's not there. It's just the way we talk about the Establishment Clause. And originally the Establishment Clause was meant to prevent the federal government from establishing a official religion. And the reason they did this was not only to prevent that religion from negatively affecting the government, but also from the government negatively affecting the religion itself, right? Because the government, think of like the Church of England, then you have the government, you have the government come in and influence doctrine of the church. Or then you might have if you have an established religion, though, you also might have the doctrine of that church be put onto the whole country. But that's not to say, though, that your faith shouldn't influence the way you think and the way you vote. The Founding Fathers agreed that in moral citizenship, America must be moral, must have Christian morals. Otherwise, it's going to fall into disarray, and that's something we see today. The idea of this separation of church and state really came out from the late 40s, from like 2 or 3 Supreme Court cases spearheaded by Justice Black. And Justice Black was a big Freemason. He was a KKK member, and he's very, very anti-Catholic. And these ideas that are being pushed out were to prevent Catholic schools from benefiting from certain government programs like after-school programs, or this was public schools, but for public schools to allow religions to come in and teach kids who opt in after school. There's always targeting Christian schools, saying like, hey, there's a reimbursement for this was in New Jersey. they try to get this in the Supreme Court overturned, but they were using a law to reimburse busing for Christian schools, Catholic schools specifically. Everyone could do it, but 97% of them were Catholic, so people were saying that wasn't supposed to happen. But anyway, that goes into a lot of history. But
So let's kind of bring the conversation back to abortion a little bit. So what would you say, I guess this is a better way to frame the question, what would you say to a person that is pro-choice for the reason being that they don't believe that life starts at conception, right? We have this conversation a lot, especially when it comes to the topic of abortion, right? This is, I think, the most important question is, where does life begin? So what would you say to somebody that thinks in that way?
Well, just flat out wrong. I'm sorry, but you're wrong. The science says, not only does religion say you're wrong, but science says you're wrong, right? Because when the egg and the sperm meet, it creates brand new DNA. A brand new DNA that's never been seen before is made. A lot of medical textbooks too say that life begins at conception. If you say it doesn't begin at conception, then where does it begin? Is it the heartbeat? Is it brain activity? Is it when it can feel pain? See, it's a scale, and that scale is opinionated. But there's objective truth in this world. And we know there's objective truth from faith and science. They work together, and it says that life begins at conception, and that's objective. That's not an opinion. Because it is an objective truth, we must defend that life. We must defend the sanctity of life in the unborn from the beginning to natural death.
Yeah, that's right. I 100% agree. And I've had those conversations, right? Where it's just like they want to settle to sort of agree to disagree, right? Because they think, okay, well, I believe that life starts when the baby can feel pain.
You can't do that.
And I think that life starts in conception, right?
Abortion is an issue you cannot back down from. You cannot back down on the abortion issue because it is literally life. So all the Republicans watching out there, do not give in. Do not give in to abortion. It is different from other issues. This is an objective truth issue. It is objectively alive from the moment of conception. There is no real debate. There's nothing else that can change that. It is the truth.
Yeah, man. I couldn't agree with you more. But like I was saying, I think that when we do have those conversations, it's very, I don't know, like the way to put it's frustrating. Because, like, you think in a certain way, you have this certain mindset perspective, right, that you bring to the table. They have one that's completely different from that. And to make each other see eye to eye, it's nearly impossible. So I want to kind of talk to you about Roe v. Wade, changing laws. Is there a middle ground here? Do we need to be fighting for a middle ground? Is the middle ground more reasonable than fighting for the end of all abortion and making it illegal, like what we see in Poland right now?
No, like I just said, it's objective truth that it's alive.
Right, but what do we do when it comes to the law?
Make it 100% illegal. 100%. Yeah, if you allow anything but, that's literally allowing for the genocide of the unborn. You know what happened in New Zealand today? They just legalized euthanasia. Like people can be euthanized now. Old people can be euthanized in New Zealand. What you're seeing with the rise of secularization in society and modernism, what you're seeing is life is being disrespected, especially for the most vulnerable. And that's the unborn, that's the elderly.
Now, do you think that it's possible to overturn Roe v. Wade and make abortion illegal here in the United States?
100%.
Now, why?
You mean like...
We have this such divide right now in our country, right? We have this such polarization where people are going to push back against that. For sure, absolutely. So elaborate more as to why you think it's possible with such a polarized society.
Simple. Sign up to the electorate. It's up to the judicial system. That's who it's up to. And guess what? We're 6 conservative justices in the Supreme Court versus 3 liberals. Yeah, of course it can be overturned. And all this.
But for the long haul or for periodic, are there going to be periods of time in which we don't see abortions and then it comes back again and then it is and it isn't?
Abortion is going to be an issue that will never be completely solved. Most issues will never be completely solved. I think it's because the left is never going to back down, right? They're not going to slap their knee and say, "Oh man, abortion's illegal. That's it. I guess I'm just going to give up." No, that'll never happen. It's going to be something you're constantly going to fight for. Even if Roe v. Wade gets overturned, guess where it goes now? States. Even if your state gets overturned, or even a state that makes a law to ban abortion, guess what? There's another state. And there's another. I doubt this. All 50 states will ban abortion at the same time. I doubt that's going to happen.
But for the states that, let me ask you this, for the states that, I think this is a better way to pose the question, for the states that absolutely refuse to ban abortion, would you settle to, say, okay, we're gonna call life starting at the heartbeat versus, third trimester abortions that we're seeing now? Would you settle for that versus, end of all abortions completely?
Nope, I can't settle. It's impossible. As Catholics, we cannot compromise on this. And as Christians, you shouldn't compromise on it either. And no, again, it's an objective truth. This isn't something we can debate about, like economics or immigration or firearms or literally most other things. Because this is an objective truth that it is alive. And conceding that at all is allowing for the death of people, like literally people.
All right, Brendan, I think that's all for today. I really appreciate you being on here. It's turned into more of me just asking you questions, but I think that for the viewers watching, I think that it provides a different perspective, absolutely, and I think that they'll definitely be interested in hearing what you have to say.
We don't endorse any of the food I've been eating here. It was good, though, but we don't endorse it. Vivo Cristo Rey.
Amen.